There's no way you can convince me you asshole.
And you called me an asshole. And then you said you hated me. Apologize for it.
I would say I've paid a heavy price for that moment.
You are my brother. Let me apologize to you if I hurt you, that we haven't been together. And God is good to bring us back together. All right? I know, man. It hurt me too. Come here, man.
Isiah Thomas says he hated 10 NBA players who disrespected or blocked his path, but the players he claims to hate saw right straight through him. His conflicts weren't about competition. They were about a man who burned bridges everywhere, then spent decades rewriting history. Let's examine the 10 players Isiah Thomas hated and what those relationships reveal. First, Michael Jordan. This beef is real. It didn't start with the walk-off. It started in 1985 at the All-Star game in Indianapolis. Michael Jordan was a rookie sensation with a Nike shoe deal. The media was obsessed with him. Isiah Thomas decided Jordan needed to be humbled. What happened became legendary. Thomas, along with George Gervin and Magic Johnson, orchestrated a freeze-out. They made sure Jordan touched the ball minimally. Jordan took only 9 shots that entire game. Millions watched a rookie get frozen out by veterans. Thomas has always denied this, calling it a myth, but the numbers don't lie. Then came the Jordan rules. As the Bulls improved, they had to get through Thomas's Pistons. Thomas and coach Chuck Daly created a specific strategy. They would beat Jordan physically every time he drove to the basket. The goal wasn't defense. The goal was to put him on the ground, to hurt him. For 3 straight years in 1988, 1989, and 1990, the Pistons eliminated the Bulls through systematic violence. Jordan saw this as dirty play. He saw Thomas as a cheap shot artist who used violence because he couldn't compete with skill. The relationship-ending moment came May 27, 1991. The Bulls swept the Pistons 4-0 in the Eastern Conference Finals. With 7.9 seconds left, Thomas and Bill Laimbeer walked off the court without shaking hands. They didn't acknowledge the Bulls. They just left. It was cowardly. It was disrespectful. Jordan was furious. Years later, when The Last Dance came out, they showed Jordan footage of Thomas explaining the walk-off. Jordan's response was immediate. "You can show me anything you want. There's no way you can convince me he wasn't an a-hole." That moment cemented Thomas as the villain in Jordan's mythology. Thomas was a 2-time NBA champion. He was a Finals MVP. He was one of the 2 best point guards of the decade, but he didn't make the 1992 Olympic Dream Team. Michael Jordan gave Rod Thorne an ultimatum. "I won't play if Isiah Thomas is on the team." Jordan's leverage was absolute. The NBA needed Jordan for global basketball more than they needed fair representation for Thomas. Thomas later admitted this exclusion cuts deep. He says he paid a heavy price for the handshake incident, but he caused that price himself. In 2020, the Last Dance documentary came out on Netflix. Thomas felt blindsided. He claimed he and Jordan had been cordial at league events. He thought they had moved past it, but the documentary put all the old footage back on screen and made Jordan look justified in his anger. So Thomas drew a line. He demanded a public apology. He emphasized the word public. Since the disrespect happened on global broadcast, the apology had to be equally visible. He claimed it was about honor, about being from the west side of Chicago, about not backing down, but it was really about refusing to accept the consequences of his own actions. Next, Scottie Pippen. The Pippen conflict is petty. In the late 1980s, the bad boys bullied Pippen relentlessly. When he had a migraine in Game 7 of the 1990 Eastern Conference Finals, Thomas and teammates mocked him. They called him soft. They said he could be broken mentally. Unlike Jordan, Pippen was vulnerable. Thomas exploited that. When the Dream Team was being selected, Pippen was instrumental in keeping Thomas off it. Pippen has stated he despised the way Thomas played. The feeling among elite players was they didn't want to spend summer with him. It wasn't just loyalty to Jordan, it was personal. Pippen thought the Pistons played a disgusting brand of basketball, but Thomas couldn't accept that Pippen had a meaningful opinion. Thomas said it himself. "I don't mind Michael Jordan saying I didn't want Isiah to be on the Dream Team. I don't mind if Larry Bird said I didn't want Isiah to be on the Dream Team. But Scottie Pippen? Man, come on. You can't say nothing." He called Pippen a janitor who just cleaned up after the stars. That quote reveals everything about how Thomas views the world. He operates on a tier system. He believes only certain people are allowed to judge him. Only the guys he deems his equals. Everyone else should stay in their lane. Pippen has fired back over the years, calling Thomas an a-hole and saying his attempts to rehabilitate his image are pathetic. apathetic. Unlike Jordan, who respected Thomas's talent even while hating him, Pippen just dismisses Thomas entirely. The petty feud with Pippen revealed Thomas's real problem. He can't accept that people simply didn't like him. Do you think Thomas deserved to be on the Dream Team? Subscribe and drop a comment below telling me what you think about this conflict. More on the other feuds coming up. Now we get to Magic Johnson. This conflict is different. It's tragic. In the 1980s, Magic and Thomas were genuine friends. They vacationed together. Their families knew each other. They kissed before the 1988 NBA Finals. It was an anomaly in an era when the Lakers and Celtics hated each other. Thomas and Magic rose above that. But as the Pistons got better and started beating the Lakers, things changed. Thomas admitted he had to stop seeing Magic as a brother and start seeing him as an enemy. By 1989, when the Pistons swept the Lakers, the friendship was dead. Then in November 1991, Magic announced he had HIV and would retire. The early 1990s were different. HIV and AIDS were heavily stigmatized. Rumors started spreading about Magic's sexuality. Magic later accused Isiah Thomas of being the primary source of those rumors. In his 2009 book, When the Game Was Ours, Magic wrote he felt betrayed by Thomas. He alleged that Thomas was questioning his sexuality in private conversations with other players. Thomas denied it. He said he was hurt that his best friend would believe something like that. But the damage was done. Thomas had earned a reputation as someone who kicks people when they're down, someone who uses personal information as a weapon. The bigger blow came in that same book. Magic admitted he participated in the Dream Team exclusion. For years, Thomas thought it was just Jordan, but Magic revealed that the elite players collectively decided Thomas didn't belong. Magic wrote, Isiah killed his own chances when it came to the Olympics. Nobody on that team wanted to play with him. He has alienated so many people in his life, and he still doesn't get it. Those words devastated Thomas. He thought Magic would have been loyal, but Magic had conspired with Jordan to keep him off the Olympics. It was betrayal on the highest level. Years later, in 2017, Magic and Thomas sat down for an emotional special on NBA TV. Magic apologized. They both cried and embraced. It looked like closure, but the damage to Thomas's legacy had already been done. The reconciliation was nice, but it didn't change the fact that Magic had participated in the blackballing. It didn't change that Magic saw Thomas as someone who had alienated everyone around him. Even after the apology, the scar remained. Let's move to Larry Bird. The conflict with Bird is really about racial politics. After the Pistons lost to the Celtics in the 1987 Eastern Conference Finals, emotions were raw. Rookie Dennis Rodman told reporters that Bird was overrated and only had 3 MVPs because he was white. When asked about it, Thomas agreed. He said, Larry Bird is a very, very good basketball player, but if he were black, he'd be just another good guy. Those comments ignited a national firestorm. Thomas was accused of reverse racism, of delegitimizing one of basketball's greatest players based on race. The backlash was severe. Thomas later claimed he was joking, trying to satirize media bias toward white athletes, but the nuance got lost. Bird, to his credit, diffused the situation at a press conference. He said if the statement didn't bother him, it shouldn't bother anybody else. Thomas later credited Bird with saving his career, but the relationship changed forever. The racial wedge was there. They maintained professional respect, but the overrated comment hung in the air. Thomas hated the narrative that Bird was the smart player, while black players were just athletic. But instead of addressing that media bias, Thomas just attacked Bird personally. And Bird never fully embraced him after that. The Celtics tradition didn't align with the bad boys style. Bird always thought the Pistons were beneath the dignity of Boston basketball. Then there's David Robinson. Robinson was everything Thomas wasn't. He was a Naval Academy graduate, a devout Christian. He was the NBA's moral authority. And Robinson made it clear he didn't want to play with Thomas. Reports indicate Robinson was vocal in the coalition that opposed Thomas joining the Dream Team. Robinson thought Thomas was dirty, disruptive, disrespectful to the game. The Olympics were a patriotic duty, and Robinson didn't think Thomas had the character for that responsibility. Thomas resented this deeply. He viewed Robinson's morality as fake, performative. He and the Pistons called Robinson soft. They mocked his supposed virtue. They said despite his physical gifts, he lacked killer instinct. What Thomas didn't understand was that Robinson was right. The Pistons played a brand of basketball that was beneath the dignity of the sport, and Thomas, as the leader of that team, embodied everything Robinson opposed. Thomas hated Robinson's holier-than-thou attitude, but Robinson's judgment was sound. Thomas was exactly the kind of player who didn't belong on an Olympic team representing the United States. Now let's talk about Karl Malone. On December 14, 1991, the Pistons played the Utah Jazz. Thomas drove into the lane. Malone was rotating to help on on defense. Malone delivered a vicious, swinging elbow directly to Thomas's face. Thomas collapsed immediately. Blood pooled on the floor. The injury required 40 stitches. There was significant swelling and head trauma. Thomas described it as the dirtiest play he had experienced in basketball. He called it horrific. He labeled Malone a cheap shot artist. Here's the irony. Thomas had spent his entire career beating people up. The Jordan rules were about systematic violence. The Pistons bullied their way through the league. But the moment someone hits Thomas the way he'd been hitting people, suddenly he's the victim. Suddenly it's a dirty play. Malone was one of the players who opposed Thomas on the Dream Team. The logic was circular. The Pistons started the violence. Malone finished it. The resulting bad blood made them incompatible teammates. Thomas resents Malone deeply, but Malone was just giving Thomas a dose of his own medicine, and Thomas hated being on the receiving end of the violence he had dealt out for years. Charles Barkley is another one. Barkley was a fierce critic of the Bad Boys during his time with the 76ers. He was a vocal proponent of the chemistry argument used to exclude Thomas from the Olympics. Barkley said the team needed to get along, and Thomas would create negative chemistry with Jordan and Pippen. Thomas felt this was hypocritical. Barkley himself was known for fights and brash behavior. Why was Barkley allowed to be aggressive but Thomas wasn't? What Thomas didn't mention was that Barkley was right. Chemistry matters, and Thomas had already proven he was a locker room problem. The Pistons in the late 1980s frequently mocked Barkley's conditioning. Thomas or his teammates would call him fat, lazy. Barkley, who was an MVP, resented that disrespect. While Barkley and Thomas became cordial colleagues in broadcasting later during the early 1990s, Barkley was firmly anti-Thomas. He contributed to the narrative that Thomas was unwanted by his peers, and that narrative was accurate. Adrian Dantley is where we see the Machiavellian side of Isiah Thomas. Dantley was a Hall of Fame scorer for the Pistons, but his ball-dominant style clashed with Thomas's preferred movement. In the middle of the 1988 to 1989 season, the Pistons traded Dantley to Dallas for Mark Aguirre. Aguirre was Thomas's childhood friend from Chicago. Dantley has steadfastly maintained that Thomas orchestrated the trade. Dantley said, "I'll never forgive you for what you did to me." He blamed Thomas directly for exiling him right before the team won championships. Thomas denies it. He claims GM Jack McCloskey made the trade to free up minutes for Dennis Rodman. But the animosity is so deep that Dantley refused to participate in the Bad Boys documentary because he didn't want to be associated with Thomas. That's not the kind of grudge that comes from a simple trade decision. That's the kind of grudge that comes from betrayal. Whether Thomas orchestrated it or not, Dantley believed he did. And his belief was based on years of knowing Thomas. This is a hate that has never cooled. It's a permanent rupture of trust. Dantley got exiled and watched the Pistons win championships without him. John Stockton is next. Stockton got the point guard spot on the Dream Team that should have gone to Thomas. At the time, many analysts and Thomas himself believed Thomas was the superior player. Thomas viewed Stockton's selection as the ultimate insult. The league chose a player with 0 championships over a 2-time champion because Stockton was safe and Thomas was dangerous. Thomas has spent years bristling at rankings that put Stockton ahead of him. He argues Stockton was a system player who fed Karl Malone, while Thomas had to create offense for a diverse team and lead them to titles. He's made passive-aggressive comments about Stockton's game, implying he was benefiting from the system rather than being transcendent. Stockton admitted Thomas was his toughest opponent, but Thomas refuses to cede the title of second-best point guard behind Magic. That competitive resentment is petty, but it's revealing. Thomas can't accept that someone he considers beneath him got recognized ahead of him. This legacy battle continues even now. And finally, Bill Laimbeer. This one is paradoxical because they were the faces of the Bad Boys, but their relationship was a transaction, not a brotherhood. They were allies in war, but socially incompatible. Laimbeer was the son of a wealthy corporate executive. Thomas was from the streets of Chicago. They defended each other on the court, but weren't friends off it. Their dynamic was a marriage of convenience. They were united by the world's hatred rather than love for each other. That's professional tolerance that bordered on disdain. So what does all this mean? Isiah Thomas tells the story of being a villain, of being excluded, of being kept off the Dream Team by a conspiracy of enemies. But here's the truth. Those 10 players weren't conspiring against him because they were jealous or threatened. They excluded him because they saw him clearly. They saw a man who used violence as a strategy, who orchestrated trades against teammates, who spread rumors about his closest friend, who mocked players for their race and their morality, who burned bridges everywhere he went and then demanded apologies when people remembered what he did. The Bad Boys Pistons won championships through intimidation. That was Thomas's choice. He led that charge. He made his teammates embrace that identity. And when the NBA decided to send ambassadors to the world for the Olympics, the elite players of the league collectively decided that Isiah Thomas didn't represent the values they wanted to project. It wasn't a conspiracy, it was a consensus. Thomas claims he paid a heavy price for one handshake, for walking off the court, But the handshake was just the final straw. The price he paid was for years of accumulating enemies, for freeze-outs and cheap shots and rumors and trades orchestrated against teammates, for a brand of basketball that was beneath the dignity of the sport. Today, Thomas demands a public apology from Michael Jordan. He says until he gets it, the beef will go on forever. But what Thomas should be asking himself is whether he's owed an apology, whether he's the victim in this story, or whether he's simply refusing to accept the consequences of being exactly who people said he was. The 10 players he hated didn't hate him because they were jealous. They opposed him because they saw him clearly. And that's a hard truth for Isiah Thomas to live with. You want more about the bad boys and the political wars of that entire era? Hit subscribe and comment below telling me which feud surprised you the most.